My name is Robert Keller, and at 62 years old, my boss looked me straight in the eyes and said I was worthless. He didn't whisper it. He didn't soften it. He said it in a glass-walled conference room, loud enough for the entire executive team to hear, right after he took credit for the software I had spent more than a decade building. I remember the exact moment because something inside me went quiet. Not angry. Not broken. Just clear. I had given that company the best years of my life. Nights spent debugging code while my wife slept alone. Weekends sacrificed to deadlines no one else understood. Birthdays missed because servers do not care about family celebrations. I wasn't just an employee. I was the architect. The system they now valued at $600 million existed because I had imagined it when no one else could see past spreadsheets and buzzwords. I joined the company when it was barely more than an idea and a rented office. The CEO, Mark Reynolds, liked to call me the old-school genius when investors were around. It sounded like a compliment, but it always carried a warning. I was useful as long as I stayed quiet and invisible. As long as I let younger executives explain my work with prettier slides. For years, I told myself that was fine. I wasn't chasing applause. I believed building something that mattered was enough. That belief cracked the morning Mark called me into that meeting. My wife, Elena, had noticed something was wrong before I left the house. She always did. "You look tense," she said as she poured coffee. I brushed it off, kissed her cheek, told her it was just another meeting. I didn't tell her that the night before, I had seen my own code rebranded in a pitch deck sent to potential buyers with Mark's name on it. I didn't tell her that my access to certain repositories had been quietly restricted. I still believed there was a reasonable explanation. I still believed in professional decency. That belief died in that room. Mark stood at the head of the table, smiling the way men do when they think they are untouchable. He clicked through slides showing projections, valuations, growth curves that climbed like fantasies. When the final number appeared $600 million, there were murmurs of approval. Pride swelled in my chest despite myself. That system was my life's work. Mark turned to me then, smile fading. "Robert," he said, "we've decided to move forward without you." The room went silent. I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry," I said. He folded his arms. "You're outdated. Slowing us down. At your age, adaptability is a liability." Someone chuckled nervously. Mark didn't stop. "Frankly," he said, "you're worthless to the future of this company." The word hit harder than I expected. Worthless. After everything. After all the nights I slept on an office couch while he entertained investors with stories about innovation. I looked around the table. Some people wouldn't meet my eyes. Others watched like spectators at an execution. No one spoke up. I felt my hands curl into fists under the table, but my voice stayed calm. "And the software?" I asked. Mark smiled again. "It belongs to the company." That was the moment I understood the meeting had never been about my performance. It was about removing the last obstacle between him and full ownership of something he didn't create. I stood slowly. "I'd like that in writing," I said. His smile faltered for half a second. "HR will handle the details," he replied. "Security will escort you out." I walked out of the building carrying nothing but my laptop and a quiet fury I refused to show. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long time without starting the engine. I was 62 years old. Too young to retire. Too old, according to men like Mark, to matter. When I finally drove home, Elena took one look at my face and knew something had shattered. "They fired you," she said softly. I nodded. The words wouldn't come. She listened as I told her everything. The insult. The theft. The way my life's work had been stripped from me with a single sentence. When I finished, she didn't cry. She didn't panic. She reached across the table and held my hands. "You built it," she said firmly. "That means they don't own you. And they don't own the truth." That night, I slept less than an hour. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop assembling pieces I had ignored for years. The private repositories I had maintained. The early versions of the algorithm written before the company even existed. The patent drafts Mark told me we'd get to later. I opened my laptop before sunrise and began reviewing everything. Dates. Metadata. Commit histories. It was all there. Proof that the core architecture belonged to me. Proof that the company's most valuable asset was built long before Mark's lawyers ever touched it. I realized something then that made me laugh softly in the dark kitchen. Mark thought he had removed a liability. He had actually removed the one person still protecting him from the consequences of his own arrogance. At 62, I was supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps remained. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Mark Reynolds had called me worthless after stealing my work. What he didn't know was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The first week after I was fired passed in a strange blur of quiet mornings and long nights. For the first time in decades, my calendar was empty, but my mind was louder than it had ever been. I moved through the house slowly, like a guest in my own life, noticing details I had ignored for years. The sound of the refrigerator hum. The way sunlight hit the kitchen counter at exactly 8 in the morning. Elena watched me carefully, giving me space but never distance. She knew I needed time to let the shock harden into purpose. On the third day, I drove back to my old office park, not to confront anyone, but to sit across the street in my car and watch people go in and out of the building. Engineers I had mentored. Managers who once relied on my judgment. They walked past the glass doors without knowing the ground beneath them was already cracking. I didn't feel anger. I felt responsibility. Because what Mark had done wasn't just theft. It was reckless. The software he claimed now powered financial systems, logistics platforms, and healthcare analytics. He didn't understand it the way I did. He never had. He knew how to sell it. I knew how it breathed. That afternoon, I opened the old external drive I had kept in a fireproof box in my study. Inside were years of work, early prototypes, design documents, handwritten notes scanned into PDFs. I had kept them out of habit, not paranoia. A builder keeps blueprints even after the house is sold. As I reviewed the files, timelines aligned in ways that made my pulse quicken. The core algorithm existed before my employment contract. The optimization layer, the heart of the system's scalability, was written on my personal machine during a sabbatical Mark insisted I take to clear my head. I remembered that conversation now with painful clarity. He had smiled and said, "Take the time you need, Robert. This company isn't going anywhere." He had been right about one thing. It wasn't going anywhere without me. I contacted an intellectual property attorney recommended by a former colleague who had quietly reached out after hearing about my dismissal. We met in a small office with bookshelves lining the walls, the kind of place where nothing was rushed and nothing was promised lightly. She listened as I laid out the story, stopping me only to ask precise questions. When I showed her the documentation, her expression changed. "They don't own this," she said finally. "They've been standing on it." Those words stayed with me. Standing on something without understanding it. That was Mark's entire approach to leadership. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked methodically. We reconstructed the development history. We prepared affidavits. We reviewed patent law, employment clauses, and the quiet gaps Mark's legal team had never bothered to fill because they assumed loyalty would last longer than law. Elena sat with me every evening as I worked, sometimes reading, sometimes just being there. One night, she asked a question that stopped me. "If you win," she said gently, "what do you want?" I thought about it longer than I expected. "I want my work back," I said. "And I want him to never call someone worthless again." The first sign that things were shifting came from an unexpected place. A former investor emailed me directly, cautiously, asking if I was aware that the company was preparing for acquisition talks. I replied simply that I was aware of the software's origins. Nothing more. 2 days later, my attorney filed a formal notice asserting my ownership claims. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. But it was precise enough to make any due diligence team freeze. Silence followed. Then panic. Elena noticed it before I did. "Your phone hasn't stopped buzzing," she said one morning. Messages from old colleagues. Missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. The second sign came when my access to a shared industry forum lit up with speculation. Deal delayed. Unexpected IP concerns. Founder dispute? Mark's name appeared less frequently in optimistic contexts. Then, one evening, Mark called me. I stared at the screen, my heart steady. I answered. Robert, he said, his voice tight, we need to clear something up. I let the silence stretch. You're causing problems, he continued. This could cost people their jobs. I almost laughed. You already decided whose job didn't matter, I replied. This isn't personal, he said quickly. It's business. Then you should understand, I said, that business runs on ownership. He tried another angle. Apologies without accountability. Compliments without respect. Offers to consult. I declined them all. After the call ended, Elena hugged me tightly. He's scared, she whispered. And she was right. The third sign was the one that told me the ground was truly moving. A formal letter arrived from the acquiring firm's legal department requesting clarification on the intellectual property dispute. They wanted documentation. They wanted assurances. They wanted certainty. Certainty was the one thing Mark could not provide. I spent the next several days assembling a package so thorough it left no room for interpretation. When my attorney sent it off, she smiled for the first time since we met. They can't ignore this, she said. I nodded, feeling the weight of the years lift slightly from my shoulders. I wasn't fighting for revenge. I was restoring order. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the living room in gold, Elena poured us 2 glasses of wine. Do you regret staying as long as you did? She asked. I thought about it. No, I said finally. Because if I had left earlier, I wouldn't have built something worth defending. At 62, I was supposed to fade quietly into irrelevance. Instead, I was watching a company built on my work tremble at the edges. Mark still believed this was a negotiation he could control. He still thought age made me predictable. He was wrong. And the moment he would realize just how wrong he was closer than he imagined. The collapse didn't happen in one dramatic moment. There was no headline-screaming scandal, no viral clip of Mark Reynolds being escorted out of his office. What happened was quieter, slower, and far more devastating to a man who built his power on perception. It began with delays. Meetings postponed without explanation. Calls that used to be returned within minutes now went unanswered for days. The acquisition talks Mark had bragged about stalled, then froze completely. Investors who once laughed at his jokes started asking uncomfortable questions he couldn't charm his way out of. I learned most of this secondhand. Former colleagues texted carefully worded updates. Industry contacts reached out under the guise of checking in. I didn't correct them. I didn't boast. I let the process do what it was designed to do. One morning, my attorney called me earlier than usual. They're asking for a settlement, she said. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. Who is they? I asked, though I already knew. The board, she replied. Not Mark. He's no longer the one calling the shots. That was the moment I felt it fully, not triumph, not vindication, but a deep, steady calm. Mark Reynolds had lost control of the story. The board wanted certainty. The acquiring firm wanted protection. And suddenly, the 62-year-old man they had dismissed as worthless was the only person who could give them both. We met in a neutral office downtown, all sharp lines and muted colors. The board members avoided my eyes at first, then gradually met my gaze as the meeting went on. They spoke in measured tones about misunderstandings and oversights. I listened politely. When they asked what I wanted, I answered without hesitation. Recognition of authorship, I said. Restoration of ownership rights. And a public correction. They exchanged glances. That could be complicated, one of them said. I smiled slightly. So was building a $600 million system from nothing. They agreed to my terms faster than I expected. Not because they respected me, but because the alternative terrified them. Mark was not present. I didn't ask where he was. I didn't need to. The agreement was finalized within days. My name was restored to the software's documentation. My ownership stake acknowledged. The acquisition resumed, this time with transparency clauses that ensured no one could erase my contribution again. A week later, I received the news from an old colleague, his message blunt and unceremonious. Marks out. That was it. No gloating. No explanation. Just the end of a man's unchecked authority. I imagined him sitting alone somewhere, replaying that meeting where he called me worthless, wondering which word had doomed him. When he finally emailed me, the tone was unrecognizable. No swagger. No condescension. Just desperation wrapped in professionalism. He wrote that he never meant it the way it sounded. That he had been under pressure. That he hoped there were no hard feelings. I read the message once and closed it. Some apologies arrived too late to matter. In the weeks that followed, my life changed in quiet, meaningful ways. I received invitations to speak not as a novelty, not as an inspiring senior, but as the architect of a system people wanted to understand. Younger engineers reached out, thanking me for standing my ground, telling me they were afraid of becoming invisible one day too. I told them the same thing every time. Your value doesn't expire. Only bad leaders pretend it does. Elena noticed the difference in me before anyone else. I slept better. I laughed more easily. One evening, as we walked through our neighborhood at sunset, she squeezed my hand. You didn't just win this, she said. You changed how you see yourself. She was right. For years, I had measured my worth by how much I was needed by people who would never protect me. Now, I understood something much simpler and much stronger. The work of your life belongs to you, even when others try to steal the credit. Age does not make you obsolete. Silence does not make you weak. And being underestimated can be the greatest advantage you are ever given. Mark Reynolds thought calling me worthless would erase me. Instead, it exposed him. If you're listening to this and you've ever been dismissed, sidelined, or made to feel like your best years are behind you, remember this story. The people who rush to discard you often do so because they fear what you still carry. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age or experience? Like this video if you believe wisdom has value at every stage of life. Subscribe for more cinematic stories about resilience, justice, and the quiet power of knowing exactly who you are no matter what anyone else says.